Majlis Profesion Pegawai Pemulihan. Apa tujuan dia? Nombor satu adalah mereka untuk mengawas lia apa-apa isu yang melibatkan proses pemulihan dadah, khususnya di peringkat puspen kita lah. Di mana dalam mereka ini adalah kita lantik sebagai pegawai-pegawai pemulihan, pegawai EDK ini sebagai satu profession yang diiktiraf ya. Dengan arti kata lain, kita ni boleh melaksanakan tugas kita dengan lebih berkesan lagi, dalam masa yang sama impak besar dalam proses rawatan tersebut. Dalam masa yang sama juga kita juga terkait dengan peranan ahli sukarelawan. Itu juga penting ya, di mana pihak EDK juga boleh melantik mana-mana sukarelawan untuk melaksanakan tugas-tugas pemulihan ni. Kita boleh siapa-siapa saja untuk sama-sama membantu isu-isu penagihan dadah. Bukan saja penagihan tetapi juga yang melibatkan pencegahan sekali, dan juga memberikan peranan untuk memperkasakan dalam komuniti. Itu juga penting. Pegawai-pegawai pemulihan kita, pegawai EDK kita juga sama-sama dibantu oleh sukarelawan luar. Itu adalah salah satu elemen yang terkandung di dalam pindaan tersebut.
Saya kira banyak yang telah pun diperjelaskan oleh Datuk sendiri berkenaan dengan Akta Penagih Dadah Rawatan dan Pemulihan 1983 pindaan 2024, dan kita berterima kasih kepada Datuk Ruslin Jusoh, Ketua Pengarah Agensi Anti Dadah Kebangsaan AADK, atas perincian dan juga penjelasan yang beliau berikan berkenaan dengan akta ini. Baik, itu saja yang saya dapat bawakan kepada anda untuk awal pagi jam ini. Sekian, saya Farhan Hakimi, kita jumpa lagi.
University Malaya is expected to offer a cardiothoracic specialist training course this October.
There will be no U-turn on the implementation of the Vehicle Entry Permit VEP for all foreign vehicles entering Malaysia from Singapore.
Diesel sales at petrol stations have decreased by 30% within the first week of the fuel subsidy rationalisation on June 10th.
Intan hanya nak Abang Falah bertanggungjawab.
Ini nak!
Mak, tolong Intan, Mak.
Kau tak boleh beli.
Assalamualaikum, selamat pagi. Anda menyaksikan Niaga Awani bersama saya Haris Ashraf Hasnan, dan kita mulakan dengan laporan yang pertama di mana Fitch Ratings mengesahkan penarafan ingkar penerbit IDR mata wang asing jangka panjang Malaysia pada BBB+ dengan tinjauan stabil. Agensi penarafan kredit antarabangsa itu berkata penarafan Malaysia disokong oleh pertumbuhan jangka sederhana yang kukuh dan luas, didorong pelaburan domestik dan asing yang teguh serta lebihan akaun semasa yang berterusan dengan asas eksport yang pelbagai.
Ia berkata kekuatan ini seimbang berbanding hutang awam yang tinggi, asas hasil yang rendah berbanding dengan perbelanjaan semasa dan kecairan luaran yang lebih lemah berbanding negara setara. Keadaan pasaran buruh yang stabil dan peningkatan pendapatan daripada kenaikan gaji penjawat awam pada Disember 2024 dan Januari 2026 sepatutnya menyokong perbelanjaan isi rumah dengan pertumbuhan disokong lagi oleh pelaburan daripada syarikat berkaitan kerajaan dan pelaburan asing yang berkaitan dengan kepelbagaian rantaian bekalan. Walaupun persesi ekspor Malaysia mendapat manfaat daripada kitaran teknologi global pada 2024, agensi itu menjangkakan momentum akan perlahan pada 2025 disebabkan oleh permintaan luar yang lebih lemah, manakala prospek pertumbuhan juga menghadapi risiko menurun daripada peningkatan ketegangan geopolitik. Selain itu, Fitch Ratings meramalkan defisit fiskal kerajaan persekutuan menurun kepada 3.5% daripada keluaran dalam negara kasar KDNK pada 2026 didorong oleh rasionalisasi subsidi yang berterusan dan kenaikan cukai yang sederhana. Agensi tersebut melihat ini sebagai laluan penyatuan fiskal yang boleh dipercayai dan beransur-ansur. Belanjawan 2025 menunjurkan defisit kerajaan persekutuan mengecil kepada 3.8% daripada KDNK berbanding anggaran 4.3% pada 2024. Justru pihaknya menjangkakan hasil kerajaan persekutuan kekal stabil pada 2025 daripada anggaran 2024 agensi itu sebanyak 16.5%. Langkah belanjawan baharu termasuk cukai ke atas pendapatan dividen individu serta perluasan cukai jualan dan perkhidmatan akan membawa hasil tambahan yang terhad yang sebahagiannya akan diimbangi oleh hasil berkaitan petroleum yang lebih rendah.
Okey, saya nak terus saja bawa kepada anda data yang dikongsikan oleh Ipsos International berkait dengan kajian berkait dengan teknologi dan juga apa jangkaan sebenarnya responden-responden terhadap teknologi, perubahan teknologi yang akan berlaku pada 2025. Baik, kita akan terus sahaja melihat kepada data dan juga angka, melihat kepada soalan-soalan yang dikemukakan kepada responden. Sebagai contoh, untuk soalan yang pertama ini, ianya berkait dengan for each of the following, please tell me how likely or unlikely you think they are to happen. Maksudnya, dari segi perubahan-perubahan teknologi. Paling tinggi, saya nak bawa paling atas sekali di sini, iaitu melibatkan artificial intelligence ataupun kecerdasan buatan. Di mana ianya antara soalan yang ditanya adalah berkenaan dengan adakah AI ini akan mengubah dari segi perubahan sektor pekerjaan dan juga akan menyebabkan seseorang itu dibuang kerja. Dengan 65% responden menyatakan bahawa it's likely, maksudnya lebih tinggi. Mereka percaya bahawa, responden-responden percaya bahawa ini merupakan 65% perubahan teknologi ini akan memberi gangguan kepada pekerjaan mereka. Dengan jumlah responden keseluruhan adalah di peringkat antarabangsa ini adalah 23,721 responden yang menjawab soalan ini. Okey, kita nak terus sahaja ke soalan berikutnya. Okey, ini antara perkara yang penting juga untuk kita telitikan dari segi jangkaan bagaimana perubahan-perubahan yang berlaku pada 2024. Okey. Please indicate if you agree very much, agree somewhat, disagree somewhat or disagree very much with the following statements. Iaitu, adakah many more people will live their lives in virtual world? Dengan kalau kita perincikan, pada 2021 sekitar 57% sahaja yang menjawab ataupun yang melihat bahawa mereka akan hidup secara virtual. Tetapi 2024 tinjauan melakukan hasil tinjauan 59% menyatakan bahawa ianya akan mengubah kehidupan mereka. Robots, bagaimana? Robots 48% sedikit menurun berbanding tahun lepas. Okey, selain daripada itu ataupun strict rules for large technology companies will be introduced by the government. Okey. Undang-undang melibatkan teknologi kepada syarikat-syarikat teknologi, 47% percaya bahawa ya. Dan self-driving cars. Okey. Ini self-driving cars ini tidak banyak berubahlah daripada 2019, 36% sahaja. 2024 menjangkakan sekitar 40% sahaja responden menyatakan self-driving cars ataupun kereta tanpa pemandu ini. Okey. Baik, kita nak terus sahaja ke soalan berikutnya. Okey. Artificial intelligence will lead to many new jobs being lost in my country. Okey. Antara yang tertinggi ataupun kita lihat dahulu global average lah dari segi tinjauan ini secara puratanya di peringkat global, 65%, Indonesia 85%. Itu adalah negara yang merekodkan pandangan ataupun mereka yang menyatakan ya ataupun likely yang paling tinggi 85%. Okey. Kemudian kita ada Philippines, Colombia, Malaysia di tangga yang sekitar tangga yang keempat. 73% responden Malaysia menyatakan ya, teknologi ini akan menyebabkan saya ataupun individu-individu akan menyebabkan dibuang kerja, lost jobs in dalam negara tersebut. Jadi yang paling terendah adalah sebagai contoh Japan, 42% sahaja yang menyatakan bahawa AI ini akan menyebabkan mereka dibuang kerja. Okey. Ini antara negara-negara ataupun soalan berkait dengan AI. Saya ada beberapa lagi soalan untuk bawakan kepada anda sebelum kita nak bentangkan ataupun ulas lanjut dengan pakar kita. Okey, soalan antaranya, many more people will live their lives in virtual world. Indonesia kekal masih lagi yang tertinggi ya di sini, iaitu 94%. Kita zoom in lah sikit. Cameraman kita Fitri boleh belanja sikit. Okey, 94%, Turki 79%, Filipin 75%, Brazil, Poland, Malaysia sekitar dalam 73% di situ yang menyatakan ya, kita akan hidup secara virtual ya. Dan selain daripada itu, okey, ada beberapa lagi data yang lain untuk saya kongsikan kepada anda. Okey, my personal data will be leaked on the internet. Ramai tak yang risau data-data peribadi mereka akan tersebar luas ya, terdedah di internet. 57% menyatakan ya di peringkat global ataupun secara keseluruhannya purata global, tetapi Malaysia sekitar 68% di sini menyatakan ya bahawa data mereka, personal data peribadi ini akan terdedah ya untuk disebar luas di internet. Okey, selain daripada itu, strict rules for large technology companies will be introduced. Ini berkait dengan syarikat-syarikat teknologi. Ramai maksudnya boleh dikatakan responden mahu bahawa syarikat-syarikat teknologi ini mempunyai satu undang-undang yang ketat kepada mereka. Kerajaan perlu melaksanakan undang-undang yang ketat, strict rules kepada perlu diperkenalkan kepada syarikat-syarikat teknologi. Malaysia kedua tertinggi, 75%. Jika dibandingkan dengan Indonesia, 85%. Diikuti Filipin, China, Singapura. Dan ini jelas kita menunjukkan bahawa apabila berlaku perubahan teknologi, perlu ada penguatkuasaan dan juga pindaan dari segi undang-undang. Tetapi dinamiknya perubahan teknologi ini memerlukan satu pendekatan yang menyeluruh. Okey, jadi saya nak bawakan kepada anda ataupun melihat bagaimana sebenarnya perubahan-perubahan ini akan menjadi asas kepada bagaimana kita nak melihat perubahan teknologi di masa akan datang. Jadi, bersama dengan saya secara dalam talian pada ketika ini, Profesor Rangkaian Komputer dan Keselamatan Cyber dari Fakulti Sains Komputer dan Teknologi Maklumat UPM, Profesor Teknologis Dr. Zuriati Ahmad Zulkarnain. Pertama sekali, Prof, terima kasih sudi bersama dengan Ezra Awani. Beberapa data telah saya kongsikan sentimen-sentimen terhadap teknologi dan AI ini. Bagaimana sebenarnya kita nak memahami dan juga menilai sentimen masyarakat terhadap perubahan teknologi terutama AI daripada kebimbangan menggantikan pekerjaan hingga potensi. Sebagai contoh, tadi ada juga data yang melibatkan kanser. Adakah sentimen ini mencerminkan persepsi yang berlebihan terhadap AI atau sejauh mana sebenarnya ia sering ataupun seiring dengan keupayaan sebenar teknologi dalam memberi kesan kepada kehidupan harian dan juga pembangunan negara? Prof.
Okey, Assalamualaikum, selamat pagi. Terima kasih Haris. Kalau kita melihat kepada laporan ramalan Ipsos tersebut, sebenarnya ia menumpu kepada transformasi teknologi yang mana ia dapat memberikan kita untuk predik, untuk melihat apakah impak besarnya terhadap cara manusia bekerja, cara kita hidup, cara kita bersosial, cara kita berinteraksi. Bagaimana teknologi tersebut dapat membawa manfaat dari segi kecekapan, kelestarian dan juga pengalaman pengguna. Kalau kita lihat tadi, laporan Ipsos ini banyak berkisar kepada kecerdasan buatan AI, blockchain dan juga automasi. Jadi semestinya teknologi ini kalau kita lihat sebab kita berada di dunia digital, tanpa kita elak bahawa teknologi ini akan evolve, akan berkembang. Dan perkembangannya adalah secara tuntas, secara cepat. di mana kalau kita lihat, bila kita kata kecerdasan, saya dapat melihat 5 fokus utama transformasi digital. Yang pertama, dari sudut kecerdasan buatan sebagai pemangkin utama. Yang kedua, automasi dan transformasi digital. Yang ketiga, penggunaan teknologi sebagai solusi isu sosial. Yang keempat, cabaran keselamatan cyber. Dan yang kelima adalah transformasi pendidikan melalui teknologi. Jadi kalau kita lihat tadi, bila sebut AI adalah kecerdasan buatan. Bila kecerdasan buatan ini, ia memberikan kita kelebihan dari sudut melihat kepada analisis data, yang berskala besar, yang mungkin akan membantu kita dari sudut membuat keputusan, mengambil keputusan. Jadi pada saya, kita semua memang akan affected, akan terkesan dengan kecanggihan produk-produk teknologi AI ini. Kalau kita lihat tadi dari sudut kesihatan, maksudnya dari sudut macam mana teknologi AI dapat membantu mengesan analisis penyakit-penyakit yang menakutkan semua orang seperti kanser, image pengubatan itu dapat memberikan dari sudut algoritma AI boleh membantu dari segi tindakan awal yang perlu diambil oleh pesakit dan juga rawatan oleh doktor. Begitu juga dengan kesan penipuan Haris, sebabnya masing-masing risau macam mana bila kita berada dalam transaksi digital, ada tak potensi untuk kita ditipu. Tapi dalam masa yang sama, teknologi AI ini sebenarnya boleh membantu kita institusi perbankan untuk melihat analisis corak transaksi. Daripada situ, teknologi ini boleh membantu untuk mengurangkan risiko kehilangan keuangan dan mempercepatkan proses penyelesaian isu pengguna. Itu yang saya lihat kecerdasan AI lah. Dan kalau kita lihat dari sudut keselamatan cyber, keselamatan data, kita lihat dari sudut teknologi blockchain itu sendiri yang membantu menentukan kesahan pengguna. Kita semua berada dalam alam digital. Kita tak kenal bila kita berkomunikasi sebab masing-masing boleh menyamar diri masing-masing sebagai anonymous dan sebagainya. Jadi macam mana kita nak menentukan si A itu adalah orang yang sepatutnya kita berinteraksi. Jadi dengan adanya teknologi blockchain yang boleh menentusahkan siapakah sebenarnya mesej itu dihantar, jadi ia boleh membantu dari sudut transformasi digital dalam urusan keuangan, dalam urusan komunikasi dan sebagainya.
Prof, penting sekali selain daripada kita lihat ancaman-ancaman itu ada dan sifat optimis, sentimen optimis rakyat ataupun responden berkait dengan kanser juga 40% ataupun Malaysian lebih kurang dalam 72% responden Malaysia menyatakan bahawa kita akan dapat mencari cure pengubat rawatan kanser menerusi perubahan teknologi. Kita faham berkenaan dengan perkara positif dan juga negatif, tetapi dalam nak mengekang keadaan-keadaan ataupun negatifnya itu dalam perubahan, dinamiknya perubahan teknologi ini, bagaimana doktor melihat bahawa pembuat dasar, kerajaan sebagai contoh, perlu melihat dari segi undang-undang dan perubahan undang-undang perlu juga dinamik seiring dengan perubahan teknologi itu. Pandangan doktor melihat perkara ini?
Haris, pada pandangan saya, bila tadi kita kata AI boleh membantu dari sudut membuat keputusan. Jadi kita semua harus ready, harus bersedia dari sudut penyediaan asas, iaitu kita punya human right, kita punya right sebagai pengguna. Jadi sudah semestinya macam mana kita nak memastikan kita punya asas hak kita itu terjamin. Jadi daripada perspektif pembuat dasar, mereka perlu cekap dari sudut menyediakan perlindungan dari sudut perundangan. Jadi semestinya teknologi provider harus alert bahawa bila teknologi itu dibawa dan ia memberikan kesan sama ada positif ataupun negatif kepada rakyat secara keseluruhan, apakah persediaan kita dari sudut teknologi provider? Sudah semestinya rakyat sebanyak itu sebagai pengguna harus dilindungi. Jadi pada saya, teknologi provider, service provider, penyedia teknologi dan penyedia perkhidmatan secara digital ini harus alert bahawa rakyat sebanyak harus dilindungi dengan adanya peruntukan-peruntukan perundangan tertentu yang harus kemas kini secara cepat. Sebab teknologi ni dia bergerak cepat. Dalam masa yang sama, asas-asas perundangan sedia ada harus ditambah baik secara konsisten, secara selari sebenarnya.
Prof, mungkin soalan terakhir saya, bagaimana Prof melihat bahawa ini adalah masa perubahan dan juga bagaimana nak melihat rakyat sebagai contoh perlu meningkatkan dari segi tahap kesiapsiagaan mereka juga dalam mendepani ialah ancaman-ancaman seperti scam dan sebagainya. Kerana akhirnya kalau nak diletakkan segalanya di bahu kerajaan, di bahu penguatkuasa juga, itu satu perkara yang sukar. Tetapi bagaimana dari segi pendekatan dan kesediaan rakyat untuk berubah, menerima teknologi, perubahan teknologi ini? Satu adalah untuk mengelak menjadi mangsa-mangsa perkara-perkara negatif yang kita sebutkan tadi. Kedua adalah untuk memastikan bahawa mereka boleh menerima manfaat daripada perubahan teknologi ini untuk meningkatkan kemahiran kerja dan juga ialah untuk memastikan bahawa perubahan teknologi ini memberi manfaat secara penuh kepada kehidupan dan pembangunan negara secara keseluruhannya, Doktor.
Itulah Haris, sebagai pengguna, rakyat sebagai pengguna mereka harus sedar kenapa mereka menggunakan asas teknologi tersebut untuk memudahkan cara bekerja, cara berkomunikasi, cara berfikir, cara membuat keputusan dan sebagainya. Dalam masa yang sama, level maksudnya ilmu yang ada harus dipertingkatkan. Awareness terhadap sesuatu maklumat, update tentang serangan dan juga ancaman harus diupdate, diperkemaskini. Kita harus ambil inisiatif untuk ambil tahu. Dari sudut awareness yang disediakan oleh pihak kerajaan dan juga penguasa, saya rasa itu harus berjalan secara konsisten. Jadi kita sebagai pengguna teknologi bukan sahaja setakat menunggang teknologi. Dalam masa bersama kita harus mengambil peluang ini secara positif, di mana teknologi ini untuk kita permudahkan tugasan kita seharian. Dalam masa yang sama bukan untuk kita menyusahkan orang lain. Jadi yang skema ni sebenarnya adalah untuk keseronokan diri dan menyusahkan orang lain. Dalam erti kata yang sebenar, bila kita nak lihat negara kita dapat membangun secara harmoni dengan teknologi asas yang ada cukup baik, ditambah baik dan sebagainya, dalam masa yang sama, insan yang ada dalam diri kita sebagai manusia, sebagai rakyat negara kita tercinta, haruslah diperkembangkan dan mempunyai satu domain yang cukup positif di mana teknologi ini sebenarnya bukan untuk menyusahkan orang lain, bukan untuk efek orang lain, tapi sebenarnya untuk memudahkan kita semua. Jadi kalau semua dapat berfikir secara positif ini, Haris, saya rasa tak adalah orang yang berniat jahat untuk menjadi scammer, untuk menipu orang lain secara online dan sebagainya. Jadi pada masa yang sama, saya mengharapkan ini merupakan titik tolak di mana kita harus berfikir secara tuntas bahawa digitalization ini sangat cepat. Jadi haruslah kita ambil peluang ini untuk menguasainya secara tuntas, secara baik. Ilmu yang tak ada kita tambah baik dan sebagainya. Okey.
Baik, terima kasih Profesor Teknologis Dr. Zuriati Ahmad Zulkarnain, Profesor Rangkaian Komputer dan Keselamatan Cyber dari Universiti Putra Malaysia, berkongsi pandangan dan juga cetusan idea beliau. Dan sudah tentu banyak lagi maklumat lain, termasuk juga lepas ini kita nak cerita berkenaan dengan e-dagang, masih lagi cerita berkenaan dengan dalam talian. Kita berhenti rehat seketika.
Nestle M Berhad melantik Raja Nomariang Muni Raja Dor Azmi sebagai pengarah eksekutif hal ehwal korporat kumpulan itu untuk Malaysia dan Singapura, menggantikan Dato' Adnan Pewanteh yang bersara pada akhir November lalu selepas 40 tahun bersama syarikat tersebut. Raja Nomariang Muni menyertai Nestle pada tahun 2011 sebagai pengurus media dan pengiklanan bertanggungjawab terhadap strategi dan pelaksanaan media untuk semua jenama Nestle di Malaysia. KKB Engineering Berhad menerusi KKB Industries Sabah sedang Berhad menerima 2 kontrak berasingan bernilai RM89 juta daripada Petros Niaga Sdn Berhad dan Gabuda Berhad. Kumpulan itu berkata menerusi kontrak yang diperoleh daripada Petros Niaga, mereka perlu membekal dan menghantar silinder gas petroleum cecair LPG baharu. Para pemegang saham Datasonic Group Berhad DGB meluluskan peruntukan option skim option saham pekerja ESOS kepada Timbalan Pengerusi Eksekutif dan Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Dato' Abu Hanifah Nordin dan Pengarah Eksekutif Erna Ismail. Bagaimanapun, pemegang saham menolak peruntukan option ESOS kepada pengarah bukan eksekutif bebas YM Tunku Datuk Noruddin Tunku Datuk Seri Shahabuddin. Laporan penuh di saluran 501 dan astrawani.com, sedagannews.com.
Bila kerja sendiri, semua kena buat sendiri. Tapi, bersama rakan niaga, semuanya dapat ditempuhi bersama.
Kementerian Dalam Negeri memberi lampu hijau supaya pengesanan dadah dilakukan terhadap pengguna web.
Tahap integriti warga polis Diraja Malaysia PDRM masih membimbangkan walaupun peringatan dan amaran diberikan berulang kali.
Anwar menegaskan bahawa negara ini tidak mengiktiraf Israel secara de jure meskipun keberadaan negara itu di peringkat antarabangsa.
Malaysia tidak akan meminda peta sempadan maritim dan tetap mempertahankan kawasan dan kedaulatan negara di Laut Cina Selatan.
Okey, baik. Pasaran e-dagang Malaysia sedang berkembang apabila pada 2024 kira-kira separuh daripada rakyat Malaysia pernah membeli barang menerusi platform e-dagang dan tahap kepercayaan pengguna juga semakin meningkat apabila rakyat Malaysia didapati semakin selesa membeli barang bernilai tinggi seperti peranti elektronik secara dalam talian. Jadi saya nak kongsikan data daripada Ipsos Malaysia berkait dengan kajian mereka di mana kalau kita lihat secara keseluruhan lebih ramai rakyat Malaysia membeli secara dalam talian sekarang dan walaupun jumlah orang yang melayari platform dalam talian berkurang, jumlah orang yang membeli meningkat 7% dan peningkatan pembelian secara dalam talian didapati ketara dalam kalangan mereka berusia antara 18 hingga 24 tahun, 35 hingga 44 tahun di wilayah selatan dan pantai timur. Dan kalau kita perincikan secara keseluruhan, peningkatan-peningkatan ini cukup memberangsangkan bagi sektor e-dagang di Malaysia. Baik, kalau kita nak melihat juga dari segi produk-produk, pembelian produk menerusi e-dagang secara keseluruhan meningkat, iaitu antaranya barangan fashion kekal sebagai pembelian paling popular 59%, peningkatan 7% jika dibandingkan pada tahun 2023 iaitu sekitar 52% sahaja, di mana kalau kita perincikan diikuti dengan barang-barang yang lain seperti barang runcit, aksesori, produk penjagaan perumahan, semuanya kalau anda dapat lihat di sini menunjukkan peningkatan-peningkatan yang positif kepada pembelian jika dibandingkan dengan tahun 2023. Okey, saya nak bawakan anda melihat kepada data berikutnya iaitu dari segi platform. Platform mana sebenarnya yang boleh dikatakan popular. Tetapi kalau kita perincikan, TikTok Shop terus meluaskan penguasaan pasarannya di mana peningkatan 8% dengan Shopee pula daripada 78% turun kepada 72%, turun 6%. TikTok Shop naik 8% dan Lazada sebagai contoh turun 2%. Grab nampaknya meningkat 2%, Facebook turun 4% dan Instagram pula turun 3% dari segi tahap penggunaan ataupun pengguna media ataupun pembeli secara dalam talian. Okey. Baik, dengan secara keseluruhan kalau kita perincikan, TikTok Shop sedang mengejar sebenarnya kedudukan Shopee di mana sejauh manakah kalau mungkin soalan yang diajukan dari segi bagaimana responden bersetuju dengan ciri-ciri di dalam platform sebagai contoh. Kalau kita lihat tawaran penghantaran segera dari segi promosi dan juga ganjaran menarik, kepelbagaian produk yang menarik, tawaran penghantaran dan juga ulasan produk yang dipercayai, semuanya menunjukkan peningkatan-peningkatan yang ketara dan TikTok kalau kita lihat berada pada angka yang sedang mengejar lah seperti saya katakan tadi berkait dengan apa yang disampaikan ataupun apa yang direalisasikan oleh Shopee di dalam perkhidmatan mereka. Jadi penting untuk kita telitikan angka ini dengan keseluruhan responden adalah sekitar 1,030 orang responden warga negara Malaysia berusia 18 hingga 74 tahun dengan tinjauan pada 1 Julai hingga 25 Julai yang lalu. Jadi ini cukup menarik sekali untuk kita perincikan dan juga melihat secara keseluruhan. Jadi saya berbesar hati hari ini bersama dengan saya di studio adalah saudara Chris Daniel Wong yang merupakan Presiden Dewan Perniagaan Digital Malaysia. Chris, terima kasih sudi bersama dengan Astro Awani. Silakan. Okey. Kita nampak angka-angka tadi cukup positif dari segi walaupun tak ramai yang menggunakan platform media sosial, tetapi jumlah pembeliannya tinggi. Bagaimana Chris melihat bahawa dalam ekosistem digital, perubahan digital semasa ini memberi peluang kepada rakyat Malaysia untuk kuasa belinya itu lebih tinggi, Chris?
Terima kasih Harib menjemput saya pada pagi ini. Yang pertama sekali kalau kita lihat, angkanya tak naik, angka pembeli itu tak naik, tetapi perubahan peratusan daripada satu platform ke platform lain nampaknya ketara dan nilai dia naik. Oleh kerana dua sebab. Yang pertama, kita nampak keselamatan pembayaran telah dipertingkatkan, iaitu kita lihat pada bila orang membeli secara dalam talian, mereka menggunakan kredit kad ataupun menggunakan debit kad ataupun menggunakan orang kata pembayaran secara FPX dalam talian. Jadi kita nampak keselamatan pembayaran sudah dipertingkatkan. Kita tak dengar lagi berita yang mengatakan bahawa kredit kad kena data-data kredit kad kena curi dan sebagainya, ataupun orang pakai kredit kad nak scam dan sebagainya. Jadi kita tak dengar benda-benda ni. Itu yang pertama. Dan yang kedua, kita nampak bahawa logistik dan perkhidmatan pengantaran menjadi lebih baik. Apabila kita membeli barangan secara dalam talian yang bernilai tinggi, the customer service tu, khidmat servis pelanggan tu, dia naik. Dia meningkat. Jadi rata-ratanya kalau kita lihat pembeli di Pantai Timur, barangan yang berkualiti dan mahal biasanya di Lembah Kelang. Jadi daripada Kuantan nak ke sini 4 jam bawa kereta, termasuk jam lah. Daripada Kuala Terengganu ke Kuala Lumpur 6 jam. Tetapi mutu perkhidmatan yang sama diberikan secara dalam talian.
Produk yang sama.
Produk yang sama. Dan mereka tak perlu datang 6 jam, 4 jam jauh ke Kuala Lumpur.
Nak patah balik.
Nak patah balik tu dah 12 jam. Termasuk duit hotel, duit minyak kita dan sebagainya. Jadi apabila mereka membeli secara dalam talian, mungkin penghantaran pos tu mahal sikit. Tetapi berbanding dengan kos logistik mereka turun tu lagi, orang kata berbaloi. Jadi kita nampak bahawa mutu logistik dan khidmat servis pelanggan tu telah meningkat. Dan yang ketiga terakhir ialah sokongan dan kawal selia. Kita nampak bahawa sebelum ni apabila orang kata pihak SME ataupun bisnes melalui proses digitalisasi, kita nampak banyak kawal selia yang tidak teratur. Tetapi selepas pasca COVID 3 tahun, kita nampak kawal selia tu lebih menjadi teratur. Jadi para pelanggan ataupun pembeli mempunyai orang kata keyakinan yang lebih tinggi.
Chris, kalau kita perincikan Pelan Hala 7 Strategik E-Dagang Kebangsaan ataupun NESR dilihat mampu untuk mempercepatkan pertumbuhan sektor e-dagang, khususnya dalam memperkukuhkan kepercayaan dan juga pengguna, menyokong perniagaan kecil dan sederhana. Bagaimana Chris melihat NESR ini? Adakah ini juga menjadi refleksi cerminan kepada pelaksanaan ini dan juga menggalakkan lagi penggunaan platform e-dagang untuk rakyat Malaysia?
Kalau kita tengok pada NESR, roadmap Hala 7 Pelan e-commerce, e-dagang nasional. Memang kalau kita lihat pada refleksi, kita nampak perkara yang ketara telah pun berlaku secara baik. Yang pertama ialah orang kata 5G. Rangkaian 5G ni sebenarnya dibangunkan melalui Pelan Hala 7 NESR. Jadi ramai yang tak tahu. Itu yang pertama. Yang kedua yang saya sebut tadi tu ialah rangka kerja kawal selia. Peraturan tu telah diadakan. Walaupun ada setengah orang kata para pengguna masih merungut tentang orang kata produk yang dihantar tu kadang-kadang rosak ataupun ada refund dan sebagainya. Benda ni berlaku. Bukan juga dalam talian, tetapi juga pembelian secara fizikal pun berlaku.
Berlaku juga.
Jadi yang seterusnya kita nampak pembinaan kapasiti. Ramai orang kata yang berkecimpung dalam bidang e-dagang ni telah dilatih. Jadi sebelum ni kita sebut mereka harus dilatih. Tetapi sekarang ni kita dah sebut telah dilatih. Mungkin selepas ni yang kita nampak kena dilatih lagi tinggi ialah dalam sektor penggunaan AI. Itu kita kemudiankan cerita kan. Okay. Tapi telah dilatih. Dan yang paling penting ialah kita nampak pada akses kepada pembiayaan. Ada satu skim baru buy now pay later. BNPL, beli sekarang installment kemudian installment kemudian. Saya nampak ada setengah platform e-dagang, saya tak nak sebut nama. Mereka membenarkan installment secara 3 bulan, 6 bulan. Barang tu mungkin tak mahal, 300 ataupun 500. Tetapi untuk cash flow management, pengurusan dana kewangan, mungkin tiap-tiap bulan bayar RM50, bayar RM100.
Daripada sekali nak kena keluar 600, 500 contoh.
Dan kaedah faedahnya pun rendah. Mungkin 1% a month. 1% a month tak rasa sangat. RM50 tu mungkin 50 sen.
50 sen.
Tak sampai RM1, RM2 kan. Jadi benda tu nampak berbaloi bila kita ada buy now pay later. Jadi kita nampak rangka kerja NSR ni pelan ni telah menggalakkan pertumbuhan e-dagang di negara kita.
Chris, mungkin kalau kita bercakap berkenaan dengan cabaran digitalisasi, mungkin apa strategi paling berkesan lah untuk, terutama untuk perniagaan tradisional, kalau kita bercakap perniagaan tradisional dalam nak menyepadukan e-dagang, mungkin dia nak the transition process daripada tradisional nak ke online platform, dan pada masa sama diorang ni mungkin tak nak kadang-kadang ialah mengorbankan nilai dan juga identiti mereka dalam perniagaan sebagai contoh. Bagaimana Chris melihat transition proses itu?
Kalau kita tengok transisi daripada cara berniaga secara lama dan cara berniaga secara baru, kita lihat tak perlu jauh. Kita lihat pada kedai-kedai makan, kedai-kedai F&B yang terutamanya di TRX, di KLCC, Mid Valley dan sebagainya. Bila kita masuk ke satu restoran, tak mewah lah orang kata, restoran sedang-sedana untuk rakyat mahir macam kita ni kan. Bila kita masuk, kita minta menu, dia tak ada menu. Dia suruh scan QR code. Scan QR code. Jadi orang tu macam saya ni, kadang-kadang ni malas nak scan QR code. Kita panggil, minta teh tarik dan sebagainya. Kita tahu apa kita nak order. Tetapi kita nampak pada generasi milenial, generasi Z, milenial tu Y dan generasi Z. Jadi kita nampak mereka ni pandai. Mereka scan QR code, mereka order.
Lebih cekap.
Betul, lebih cekap. Mereka scan QR code, mereka order secara dalam talian. Dan order tu dihantar kepada dapur dan juga point of sale system. Jadi itulah integrasi fizikal dan juga dalam talian. Itu untuk makanan. Kalau untuk sektor fashion pula, saya sebelum ni di awal ni saya pernah sebut dan sekarang ni dah berlaku di Malaysia. Kita nampak jenama yang tinggi dan juga sederhana. Mereka ada orang kata dalam talian, katalog dalam talian.
Betul.
Jadi ramai para pembeli yang masuk dalam talian. Mereka tengok. Tapi bila kita nak beli baju, kita nak cuba.
Betul.
Kita nak ada feel, betul tak? Jadi apabila kita lihat dalam talian, benda tu cantik. Jadi kita masuk kedai.
Betul.
Jadi ada penggalakan di sana. Yang dalam talian tu ibaratkan macam orang kata iklan.
Survey lah orang kata, nak survey dulu.
Betul.
So bila interest tu dah ada, kita pergi physical store.
Jadi itulah yang kita panggil, saya panggil ni sebati. Kita sebatikan antara dalam talian dan juga secara fizikal. Itu bisnes yang kita nampak. Ada juga setengah konsultan yang memberi khidmat pelanggan servis. Tak payah jumpa pelanggan. Kita Zoom je lah. Ataupun kita Google Meet je lah. Bincang setengah jam, 1.5 jam, tak payah lalu jam dan sebagainya. Dah habis tu kita hantar dokumen secara online. Jadi banyak sangat jenis perniagaan yang merentas negeri, merentas negara dilakukan secara dalam talian.
Bagaimana pula dengan produk yang bernilai tinggi, sebagai contoh telefon bimbit dan smartphone. Dulu orang beli casing smartphone dalam talian, orang beli online. Tetapi sekarang ni handphone sendiri dibeli secara dalam talian. Bagaimana kepercayaan, kita lihat kepercayaan jauh lebih tinggi rakyat terhadap ataupun sebagai contoh kan, aksesori, fashion dan juga peranti elektronik ni naik tinggi 12% sebagai contoh. Chris, bagaimana Chris melihat melihat kepercayaan pengguna terhadap platform e-dagang ini?
Saya rasa tak ada isu sebenarnya. Bagi saya, pengalaman saya sendiri, saya pernah membeli laptop secara dalam talian semasa zaman PKP. Sebab anak saya nak pakai laptop, saya beli secara dalam talian. Tetapi yang harus kita ingat apabila kita membeli secara dalam talian, kita kena tengok status orang kata peniaga online tu. Seller tu verified. Dia ada dua status, sama ada verified ataupun authenticated. Jadi kita nampak status tu, jadi kita rasa bahawa mereka ni telah ditauliahkan oleh orang kata platform platform provider. Itu yang pertama. Yang kedua, kita tengok pada review. Kalau dua-dua ni betul, jadi kita beli. Jadi saya rasa bila orang menjual handphone yang berjenama ataupun laptop berjenama, tak adalah mereka nak jual barang ciplak tu tak. Sebab kalau betul dia orang jual barang ciplak, barang tiruan, apabila ada kes legal, kes guaman dan sebagainya, kosnya lagi mahal.
Betul.
Jadi saya rasa tak berbaloi lah buat benda-benda ni kan.
Okey, mungkin akhir sekali ataupun melihat kepada mungkin apa elemen kritikal lah sebenarnya yang perlu diberi perhatian untuk memastikan bahawa trend peningkatan ini, yang kepercayaan terhadap pembelian secara dalam talian ini kekal berterusan, Chris. Kita nak memastikan bahawa ianya bukan sahaja berterusan tetapi nak memastikan dalam jangka masa yang panjang. Bagaimana Chris melihat perkara ini, termasuk ialah pengadaptasian teknologi, transaksi yang lebih selamat, logistik yang lebih baik, Chris?
Kita kena lihat pada kelasterian industri e-dagang ni. Kelasteriannya ialah sustainability. Yang kita tengok cabaran ni ialah bagaimana kita, cabarannya sentiasa ada.
Betul.
Kalau tak ada cabaran, semua orang jadi jutawan lah.
Betul.
Dan saya dan awak tak duduk kat sini.
Kita buat bisnes online je.
Kita buat bisnes online je. Jadi saya nampak ni ialah ancaman keselamatan cyber. Bukan perlu dipertingkatkan. Kena sentiasa kita berwaspada. Dan juga kebimbangan privasi data. Kita ada akta PDPA dan sebagainya. Baru-baru ni kita tengok pada online news, ada orang kata data daripada setengah-setengah kementerian telah dijual dalam dark web dan sebagainya, tapi tak betul dan sebagainya. Jadi benda inilah yang membimbangkan para pengguna. Dan yang terakhir sekali ialah kita lihat pada potensi kelebihan tepu platform, iaitu bermaksud the oversaturation of platform. Kalau kita tengok pada data yang sebelum ni, kita nampak pengguna tak meningkat.
Betul.
Tapi nilai meningkat.
Nilai pembelian tu yang meningkat.
Pembelian meningkat. Ini bermakna bahawa the platform has been oversaturated. Penggunanya sama saja. Macam kita banyak mall di Kuala Lumpur kan. Orang datang sama saja. Tetapi it's overspread. Jadi akan tiba satu masanya, bukan sekarang, akan tiba satu masanya ada setengah platform yang tidak berdaya saing akan, orang kata, tidak lagi di dalam pasaran.
Dilihat tidak relevan lah.
Tidak relevan di pasaran. Ada pula setengah pula merger dan acquisition. Seperti Celcom dan Digi dan sebagainya. Itu contohnya. Jadi saya lihatlah. Sekarang ni kita dah nampak trend oversaturation. So sama ada gabungan ataupun ada yang akan, orang kata, tak lagi relevan lah. Itu saya nampak.
Sudah tentu penyedia-penyedia platform digital ini juga perlu memainkan peranan mereka dalam nak menggalakkan pembelian. Dan saya percaya kempen-kempen, yalah sekarang ni banyak 12-12, 11-11, year end sale dan 10, sebagainya, 10-10 tiap-tiap bulan ada je sale, mid month sale pun ada, hari gaji pun ada sale lagi. So jadi saya percaya tarikan ini antara perkara yang boleh menggalakkan pembelian secara dalam talian, dan juga pengguna juga perlu melihat dari segi keselamatan dan bagaimana mereka nak memastikan bahawa data-data mereka kekal selamat. Penggunaan informasi dan juga maklumat-maklumat yang diberikan seperti kad kredit, kad debit mereka juga kekal selamat secara dalam talian. Itu juga cukup penting, elak daripada kena scam. Dan juga rajin-rajin lah baca review. Bacalah review. Kalau nak tengok seller tu, baca review. Apa orang kata kan. Itu cukup penting sekali untuk pembelian dalam talian ini. Okey, baik. Terima kasih Chris Daniel Wong berkongsi pandangan beliau, Presiden Dewan Perniagaan Digital Malaysia di PDM, yang berkongsi aspirasi beliau dan juga bagaimana kita melihat data-data ini yang mungkin akan merubah lanskap perniagaan secara dalam talian di Malaysia, dan itu semua yang dapat kami kongsikan buat masa ini. Selepas ini kita ikuti temu bual rakan tugas saya Najib Aruf berkait dengan sektor perindustrian dan juga rangkuman melibatkan niaga Spotlight, dan kita berhenti rehat seketika. Kita akan bersambung semula selepas ini.
Nak coklat? Hari ni tak boleh. Nanti saya kena dengan mak saya.
Pepsodent baharu disahkan halal. Microkalsium aktif dan Proflorida Complex membantu memperbaiki lubang halus akibat makanan manis sebelum menjadi kaviti untuk perlindungan maksimum. Pepsodent.
Venom, The Last Dance. Early access di rumah.
My creator has found us. There comes a time in every man's life where you have to make a sacrifice. But I need him.
This world can't survive if you stay together.
Eddie, I'm with you to learn.
Venom, The Last Dance. Early access di rumah. Sewa dan stream on demand atau sim ke saluran 480.
Right, more than 5 decades ago, MAA Group was founded with the vision to transform the landscape of Malaysia's business sector. From its humble beginnings, the group has grown into a prominent player with diversified interests across manufacturing, financial services, and also more industries as well. But today, MAA Group continues to innovate and expand under the leadership of its Executive Chairman, Tunku Datuk Yaakob Khairap, remaining at the forefront of the industry, of course, in terms of development, also contributing to the Malaysia's economic growth and global competitiveness. Joining me right now is Tunku himself. Tunku, thank you so much for joining Niaga Awani. Reflecting for the past 55 years or so, what are the most significant milestones for the MAA Group itself?
Okay. Well, if you know the history of MAA, MAA started off as an insurance company. Mainly in life insurance and non-life insurance. It was actually a spare license as part of the AIA group. And in that sense, they kept the company small. Very small life insurance unit, very small general insurance unit. But since the acquisition of MAA by the Malewa Group, or family group, in 1985, we embarked on a mission of growing the company. And so we did grow under MAA. We changed the name to Malaysian Insurance Alliance, and we grew very, very rapidly and very successfully. But that was 1985, was a long time ago. And about 10 years ago, we decided to diversify our business. The MAA Group decided to, and we realized that the insurance industry wasn't going to generate the profits that we wanted. Not so much profits, but in terms of the capital requirements was ever increasing. More and more money had to go in as paid up capital, which meant hardly any dividends. So as a yield, it wasn't really made any sense to be invested in the insurance industry. And we sold MAA Assurance 10 years ago. And 2 years later, we also sold our Takaful insurance business. But we did keep our Philippine insurance business, and sometime this year, we also sold that. Okay? So we're pretty much out of the insurance industry. So in our diversification strategy, we've expanded into several areas. One being financial services, in basically factoring invoices for industry, at the same time as credit services for companies. The other area we focus our attention in is also in education. In particular, mainly primary and secondary schools. We are the owners of St. John's International School, which does basically IGCSE and A-levels for a British curriculum for students. We also have opened recently in Kota Kinabalu, Imperium International School, mainly a secondary school, again doing IGCSE subjects. We have a tuition center called Kasturi Tuition, and we have one small college called, this is a tertiary, called Imperium International College. But going forward, on the education sector, we expect to open more and more schools. Now, the third area we're involved in is in hospitality. hospitality in not the ownership of hotels, but in managing hotels. Okay, this unit is called Hospitality 360, and it runs right by the end of mid next year. We will be running 10 hotels in Malaysia. At the same time, we also have a unit under that wing called Perfect Host, where we are also one of the largest Airbnb operators in the country. The industry, we don't call it Airbnb, the industry is actually called shortlet.
Yeah.
Okay? And we are very large in particular that area. And of course, the other area we're looking at is entertainment and lifestyle. And in this area, we've expanded, particularly in Sabah, where we've opened a chain of shop lot cinemas. Shop lot cinema is basically you rent eight shop lots and you open 6 cinema halls, each typically about 65 seats per hall, especially in rural areas where there's no cinemas. Yeah. And part of our social community works, we also provide free shows for underprivileged children, things like that.
We'll talk about diversification because, of course, like you mentioned just now, you were in the financial services, education, hospitality and adventures as well. But a lot of companies out there, they also believe in having core business rather than diversification. But for MAA Group, how would you like people to know MAA Group right now? Because it's really different industries that you are venturing in.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's conglomerates tend to have a diversified portfolio. And investors, some people prefer conglomerates, to invest in conglomerates, but most people prefer to buy stocks in companies that focus in one particular industry. All right. So in our case, we are in effect a small conglomerate, but trying to nurture several industries with the hope that eventually, when the education unit matures, we will list that. And when the hospitality unit matures, we will also list that. So we are more as a investment holding company. I like to think of like Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway. Yeah. So I like to think of us as doing that, looking at new areas where there's growth. Definitely, I like the area of hospitality because tourism is one of Malaysia's core focus industries, and there is no significant real hotel management chain in Malaysia, specializing in managing many hotels. Yeah. The Airbnb or short-let industry is also a growing industry, new industry, and many of the short-let operators are small-time operators. We are the largest organized short-let industry. So these are new growth areas, and deserve their own listing one day. Yeah. The education sector also is a growing area. As people expect to have higher and higher standards of education, and parents are prepared to pay for good quality education at a reasonable price, that is also an area of growth. Yeah. Okay, and I like that area of education. Of course, entertainment like cinemas is also growing, but again, in our case, rural areas has not been tapped. Yeah. So yes, we are in a sense a diversified group, but we're nurturing these businesses to eventually become specialist listed companies.
So what's the new industry or industries in the sense that are in the pipeline for MAA Group in the future?
Well, we're just going to, for now, I think we're a bit stretched in terms of management and in terms of time. So what we have now is going to be the core, maybe looking at some new industries in the medical sector. It's something we are studying, but have not made the call whether we are going to invest in that sector or not.
And the markets, is there any new markets that you are planning to tap into?
Yes, well, in particular, the opportunities to grow is basically in the education and the hospitality sector. In the hospitality sector, for right now, we are focusing just in Malaysia. But there's no reason why we can't eventually expand to managing hotels in Indonesia or Thailand or Vietnam. But on the education sector, there is a lot more activity, opportunity. We hope to open a new school in Malaysia, in KL, with a British brand school. I wouldn't name the name of the school yet, since we have not got Ministry of Education approval yet, but it is be a British-branded international school in Malaysia. That same school has also given us the rights to open a similar school in northern Italy. And we're also looking to do that similar school in the UAE. So the education side will grow more internationally.
The education business is very interesting because you mentioned a lot about that. But how do you measure the success of this particular industry? Because it's quite, I mean, not so many industry players. I mean, it's not really the main industry focus for a lot of corporate companies. But for you, how do you measure the success of this industry?
I think the success of the industry will depends ultimately is if you can provide a good service for the parents and the students. If you do a good job, you'll see the number of students increasing. Right? And so my measure is the number of students. Whether you're operating in the lower band range, like in St. John's International School, which is a very, very affordable school, roughly about 22,000 ringgit a year to do your IGCSE, or to a more expensive, say, the UK brand that we're going to bring in. They'll be in the 80,000 ringgit a year brand. So it's the number of students that you recruit is your measure. And of course, student retention.
Let's talk about the hospitality, because you mentioned you're not ruling out any possibilities of going into other markets, of maybe managing hotels in Indonesia and Thailand. But we've learned a lot from COVID-19, for instance. But how do you position yourself? But how do you see the hospitality industry in terms of the future of hospitality and the risk and the downside risk of the hospitality industry?
Yes. I think, yeah, COVID certainly did affect the hospitality industry, but it affected almost every industry in the world. Okay? Almost every industry was hit, except for the education. Kids were still going to school, even though online, and parents were still paying school fees. So I would say only the education side was okay. It did okay. The tourism industry, yes, it was affected. Fortunately, when they lifted the MCO, people started moving around again. So I don't think hopefully, inshallah, there won't be another COVID lockdown. I hope that the governments in the future, when you do come across another scenario like that, will find other ways to manage the contagion other than lockdown. Because the damage to many economies was severe. And I think many countries, like in Europe, where they are actually suffering today economically, was actually caused a lot because of the lockdowns. Yes, and that's an issue. Now, on just maybe on the hospitality side, I also want to highlight that apart from us managing the hotels, we also carry branded products. For instance, we are closely tied up with the Wyndham Group, and their brands are the Ramada, the Wyndham Grand, the Wyndham Garden. So, for instance, recently in Fraser's Hill, we launched a new hotel in Fraser's Hill called the Wyndham Garden Shazan. Okay, so that's a new brand in Fraser's Hill. We have Ramada Kuala Lumpur. We have Ramada Johor Bahru. We had Trinidad Puteri Harbour in Johor Bahru as well. And we also have Shazan Hotel in Kuantan. And we're adding a few more, like in Malacca, there'll be the Lisbon Hotel right on the water. So we're growing in terms of brands, some homegrown brands like Shazan and Trinidad, and international brands like the Wyndham Gardens, Wyndham Grand, and Ramada.
Let's talk about a little bit about the financial services sector that you are in right now. In terms of its transformation with a lot of technology transforming into financial services. Now we'll talk about fintech, we'll talk about a lot of digital banking that's happening right now. But how has MAA or group, adapted to these changes?
Well, we're still growing and still learning, but the main area of focus for MAA Group and the financial services sector is factoring of invoices of companies who go out selling bills. If you know what factoring is basically if I'm a supplier of, say, computers to a bank. I'll supply them with computers. I'll give them an invoice. The bank may pay me in 30 days. But if I need my money now, I can't wait 30 days. I would factor that bill and come to a company like, say, MA, and get my money up front, maybe not all, maybe 80% first, so I can use that to run my business. And when the bank finally pays, they'll pay MAA, and MAA will pay whatever the difference is due to the supplier. That's called factoring of invoices. So an area that we want to focus on is the e-perolehan system. Right now, anybody who supplies equipment to the Malaysian government would go through the e-perolehan system, where it's an online system. All right? And by factoring these invoices, the supplier to the Malaysian government gets his money first, and through the e-perolehan system, eventually when the government does pay, through the electronic system, we will be paid, and then we'll settle the difference with the supplier. So in terms of technology, in that sense, the government itself has created this system that allows convenient, efficient payments system to its suppliers, and we can play a role in helping improve the liquidity for those suppliers.
Last but not least, after 55 years from insurance into a diversified group right now, but what's your hope for the future for MAA?
Well, as you, the issue that for MAA and the future in the past is this: the insurance industry was profitable, and a lot of people say, Tunku, why are you selling your profitable business? Right? Because now you don't have any profits. You got rid of all your profits. But yes, we have sold our profitable business, but we sold it for a fair and good price. Okay, we basically did very well getting the price we got. So with that money, we now basically putting into new industries: hospitality, education, financing, entertainment. Now, like any new industry, it takes a few years before it becomes profitable. Like any business, hospitality, it took 2-3 years before it becomes profitable. A school, when I open a school, the first 3 years I will definitely lose money, because as the number of students slowly fills up the class, but once it's full, like during COVID, it's very stable. Okay, very, very stable. If I get a student coming in at standard 1, year 1, and he leaves after, I'd say, IGCSE at year 11, I've got him for 11 years. You know, that means every year I only need to recruit 1/11th my population. So it takes time, but when you got that portfolio, it matures, it's solid. So our challenge will be next couple of years, we will be reporting losses. We've expected that, which is why we raise a lot of money through the sale of our insurance companies, so we have the strength to suffer those years of losses, which we expect. So in the future, in the next 2-3 years, I hope that we will start seeing the P&L of the group improve and become very, very stable. So I'm investing now for the future.
All right. So good. Thank you so much for joining Negara One this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hasil karya anak tempatan yang berbeza.
Kita kancil yang boleh jadi malas juga sepanjang zaman lah.
Ini adalah karya agung.
Kancil, kisah lama berwajah baru.
Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kausji. Niaga Spotlight goes through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Well, today on Future Affairs, we're looking at a very timely and interesting topic indeed, and a deep dive into the generational wealth revolution, as well as how millennials and Gen Z are redefining wealth. Now, a couple of data points before we embark on the topic. By 2045, a staggering 84 trillion USD will move from the hands of baby boomers to millennials and Gen X, and this is a massive generational transfer of wealth. Now, as millennials and Gen Z emerge as both creators as well as inheritors of wealth, this is shaping a completely different future from what the investment landscape has looked like over the past 50 or more years. So, the investment migration market, which is actually being led by millennial and Gen Z high net worth individuals, or HNWIs, is surging to over 21 billion USD annually. economy. Younger generations are, of course, increasingly prioritizing foreign homes, sustainable investments, and this is also true across the wider Southeast Asian region, including Malaysia. Niaga Spotlight today delves into a lot of the factors that are anchoring this generational shift of wealth, and I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming today in the studios to join us live Nirbhay Handa, who is co-founder and CEO of Multipolitan. Nirbhay, a very good morning. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Tahmina. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. So let's get straight into the discussion. Now, let's talk about the shift in values among millennials and Gen Z and how it's actually influencing their approach to wealth transfer, something which Multipolitan has been tracking for a while now.
Thank you, Tahmina. So Multipolitan is an immigration platform. We provide immigration opportunities to over 50 places globally.
Right.
A big part of our audience is high net worth individuals and affluent families. And as a result of that, it becomes very important for us to track private wealth trends, and hence why we've come up with this report. And we're speaking about this colossal wealth transfer that's taking place between baby boomers and millennials.
That's right, 84 trillion USD by 2045.
That's a huge number.
That is, and that is less than 3 decades away. While it may seem like numerically, all right, that's a little bit medium to long term, but you're seeing the shifts already occurring now, right?
No, absolutely. And I think if you look at how our fathers were investing and how we invest is starkly different, right? I think millennials, they have a higher risk appetite. They also feel barriers to real estate have increased over the years. So they prefer alternative assets in general, whether that's investing in high-risk equities or whether that's getting into digital assets. The entire crypto narrative is very close to millennials. And the other piece is, I think there's been a huge narrative around this democratization piece, right? Now, millennials as investors, they have access to fairly sophisticated information that back in the day was only kept with a few people. Right? And as a result of that, there has been an immense democratization with wealth generation as well, right?
Absolutely, because what we're talking about essentially when it comes to the democratization, would you say that what's been unleashed by the internet and access to information is the critical key component that differentiates millennials, Gen Z from parentals?
Yeah, absolutely. And you could see that because now we're seeing more first generation entrepreneurs than ever before.
That's right. Correct.
And as a result of that, millennials are also very focused on self-governance. So the rise in investment migration that you briefly touched upon, they want to transcend beyond the borders they're restricted to, right? They want to look at fiscally competitive landscapes where they can take their businesses. So as a result of that, millennials and particularly Gen Z, we find they're extremely transnational, very cosmopolitan.
So now investment migration, let's dig a little deeper into that, Nirbhay, because that's very interesting. And what it's showing is that it's become pretty fundamental amongst the shifts that we're seeing in an increasingly volatile world. Anyone who's around today still, we have lived through a once-in-a-lifetime, hopefully, pandemic, but that also shifted perspectives towards how younger HNWIs invest, right?
Yeah, I agree. And if you look at, what we say is, Tahmina, the utility of an alternative residence is going to be a lot higher than you owning a car, right? And why I say that is if you look at the Global Peace Index, there are right now more than 56 conflicts going on.
True, active conflicts.
Active conflicts. So what's the point of speaking about investments or wealth preservation if you don't have the basic necessities of life, which is security? Right?
Absolutely.
And particularly, let's say if you're based in a place like Israel or you're based in a place like Lebanon, getting an alternative residence is not a need, it's a necessity. It's not a want, actually, it's a necessity, right? And that's why this is a topic which is really touching a lot of lives, and millennials are pursuing these opportunities aggressively than ever before. Right.
Well, that's very fascinating because at the same time, there are ways in which technology and digital platforms are enabling both millennials as well as Gen Z. Let's talk about the role of fintech, of financial technology, and how you have seen it radically shift from something which was handy to have to something which is actually playing a crucial part in how the younger generation is investing.
This is really the touch screen generation, as we call it, right? I think we're in an era of vibrancy and vitality, right? The wealth management landscape drastically needs to change from boring forms to something which is more interactive. And I think we've seen legacy institutions sort of gamifying this industry to a great measure to capture engagement from younger audiences. right? And I think we see that happening. For example, Citi has its Velocity app. Goldman Sachs just recently announced they're launching their proprietary digital asset trading platform in the wake of right around the news when Trump got elected, because that's very positive for particularly the digital asset landscape.
Understood. Given the very bullish approach that potentially the future administration is going to have towards cryptocurrency.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going back to the same narrative of transparency and democratization, I think millennials and Gen Z, they want to eradicate intermediaries, and that's why there's a big digital asset revolution, right? So a lot of these apps are built on smart contracts and Ethereum, right? Which really eradicates any intermediaries that are involved in a lot of these protocols. Also lending and staking, which is, gaining interest on the investments that you're holding within the digital asset space, have become really popular, particularly with millennials and Gen Z.
That's right. And that is actually pointing towards a lot greater access to personalized as well as transparent wealth management. Is that making, as you said, investors who are younger even bolder in what they're exploring with regards to fintech?
Absolutely. I think the risk appetite has drastically increased, but at the same time, we see there's a big trend on ensuring profits come with progress, right? So we've seen the ESG narrative really pick up amongst millennials and Gen Z. They want to ensure the investments they're making, their values are aligned with it. And, we can see that with examples like Patagonia, right? The brands have become really mainstream with millennials and Gen Z. But also if you look at big businesses, for example, Salesforce and Microsoft, they're really big on diversity and inclusion. Right, green bonds is the new buzzword. Apple issued $4.5 billion green bonds. Similarly, Google had a sustainability bond that they issued. So I think these narratives are very close to millennials, and they want to ensure that their investments, there is a purpose around it, and it's aligned with their personal values, Hemina.
Exactly. So personal values are also intersecting with faster and more efficient wealth growth through a lot of these alternative investments.
Yeah.
What about robo-advisors, for example? Are you also seeing that as part of a wider continuing trend, or is it just flash in the pan?
No, I think it's gonna really be a continuing trend, because what robo-advisors do is they give you actionable insights on fundamental and technical analysis, which is an expensive affair if you're working with a financial advisor.
Absolutely.
Right? So I think the barriers to entry when it comes to trading are reduced drastically with robo-advisory coming in. Right? But again, at the same time, you have to be mindful and do enhanced due diligence on what you're buying. Right? So I think that's where education becomes quite critical, guiding millennials and the younger generation in terms of how to ensure there's longevity to this wealth that they have or they're generating.
Exactly. So that brings me to another dimension, which in finance, of course, it is often seen as a special interest sector.
Yeah.
But given Multipolitan's experience and expertise in looking across various financial markets to collate your data, let's talk about the role that women, especially millennial as well as Gen Z women, are playing as active investors and high net worth individuals, because that's something which has also radically shifted from 1 or even 2 generations ago, right?
Yeah.
We primarily saw, as we could quite easily say, our fathers were the ones investing. Now it's not necessarily only them, right?
And I think you could probably respond to that question much better than me, at the back of the conversation that we had. But I think, there's a study by McKinsey which says ensuring there's diverse leadership, financially, these teams tend to perform 35% better.
That's correct.
Right. Yep. And I think diversity has become a critical aspect of how the world is shaping around us. Right. I'm certain you've seen the new Jaguar branding, which came out
That's correct.
Recently. Right.
Caused quite a furore.
Yeah. And I think, and coming back to the same point that we discussed earlier, the new age of investors, they really want to be aligned to where their money is going. From a values perspective, right? And gender empowerment, women in leadership is an extremely crucial and important topic that millennials and Gen Zs are impacted by.
Yeah, so also perhaps the companies which they choose to invest in or the stockholder options which they have could actually be impacted by this.
Yeah, most definitely. Right?
All right.
And, you've seen the appointment of Lina Nair as the CEO of Chanel.
That's right.
And Chanel, obviously, as a brand, has had a lot of mystique over the years. but she coming out and speaking openly with the gravitas that she has obviously driven a lot of engagement for Chanel. So women in leadership become iconic at the end of the day, right?
Exactly.
And they attract a lot of interest around, you know, what they do.
Exactly. So that also shifts the focus into what companies and high net worth stock market options actually are. It's actually being shifted, I think, year on year, not so much generationally. Let's look at the prioritization of ESG compliant investments, green and impact investing.
Yeah.
What are some interesting trends or insights that you have noticed, particularly with regards to the more and more present impacts of climate change?
Yeah, I think we're growing up in a generation, Tehmina, we hear about climate change all the time, right?
That's right. Or we, you know, drive through floods perhaps,
Yeah.
occasionally, right?
Yeah, and climate change is impacting lives in a significant way. And I think it's also one of the big triggers for investment migration. You know, there are countries which are suffering at the back of climate change, and there's a real need for people to actually move because of it, right? But coming back to your question, I think there's a huge narrative around the ESG piece, right? As we spoke about the green bonds that Apple has issued, this entire narrative is really picking up.
Yeah, we're also actually seeing non-ESG compliant assets. They are being increasingly reallocated into ESG focused funds.
Yeah.
So there is a clear shift within companies themselves as well to be conscious so that they can actually appeal to a different type of investor. Let's move from there, Nirbhai, to talking a little bit about shareholder advocacy and active ownership. What is that landscape looking like, particularly now because the average age of majoritarian shareholders is now dropping into the millennial generation and maybe even Gen Z?
Yeah, we've seen that particularly in ExxonMobil, right? There was level of shareholder activism around making the company more climate forward, right? And we see that increasingly within family offices as well, Tehmina. They've now become centers of innovation. So if an heir is really keen on investments within the ESG space, there are times when family offices would provide private equity capital or venture capital to fund those companies.
Right.
Right. So that is a trend that we're seeing really take over, right? Where the new generation gets involved with the older generation and then can redirect investments in terms of where they're going, right? Whether that's within the ESG space, whether that's within the climate tech space, right? Which is again a very hot area where a lot of investments are going at this stage, Tehmina.
Exactly, those 3 Ps, right? People, purpose, and planet. But I think we're seeing it actionably roll out when it comes to where people are choosing to put their money. Right. Let's talk a little bit around the space whereby HNWIs, high net worth individuals, are actually shifting specifically to relocating and also to buying property that is overseas. The Southeast Asian market, Malaysia in particular, even Singapore, etc. But perhaps Malaysia to a larger extent due to our wider geography and land availability can be a very attractive market for this.
Absolutely. I think Malaysia is very habitable. There are great schools for families, you know, with young children to be here. Having said that, a big part of bringing people to a country is a lot about creating incentives for them to being there, right? And I think Dubai has done that very well. For example, you know, with their golden visa scheme, the ease of getting golden visa it's quite straightforward, right? For example, I have a golden visa. By virtue of having a Dubai golden visa, I ended up opening a bank account in UAE. Right.
Sure. So it just eases the entire ecosystem.
It just eases the entire ecosystem, and obviously, you know, Dubai positions itself as a really competitive fiscal landscape, right, from a taxation perspective. So I think Malaysia has a great opportunity, right? At the end of the day, we're walking into an era where countries are going to start competing for talent.
Absolutely.
Right? And Malaysia needs to be on forefront of that. And I think they've done that with the MTEP, the Malaysia Tech Entrepreneur Pass, right? But very important with these things is, are you marketing these opportunities globally to investors?
Very true. It shouldn't have to be something that you have to hustle to find or know someone locally necessarily. This should be open to a global audience, preferably online, right?
Absolutely, and I think that's where Multipolitan comes in, and that's the business that we're really in, ensuring that entrepreneurs, they get access to places where it's easier for them to build their companies, which are fiscally robust, where they can hire foreign talent and create competitive businesses.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of competitive businesses, another arena which is of great interest to HNWIs is particularly emerging markets, specifically the wellness sector. Let's talk about what movements and shifts that you're seeing in it, which is actually quite related to the current global landscape.
Yeah, I was just noticing if you're wearing a Fitbit or a Whoop, because I think the wearable health industry has really taken over, right? I think if you look at just the valuation of apps like Noom, Calm, Headspace, it's in billions of dollars, right? So I think health is an asset class, right? You cannot create wealth without health.
Very true.
And,
absolutely.
And particularly within this wealth report, you know, we've had a lot of commentaries on preventive medicine, longevity, right, and mental health. How it's so critical for entrepreneurs to look after these three areas, you know, if they want to be building compelling businesses for the future.
Absolutely.
Right? So this is an industry which is very close to the hearts of millennials.
So it definitely makes sense because with longevity, of course, then comes the opportunity to further expand these industries. Just as a point of interest, I wonder whether nearby there was some trend that quite radically shifted in favor of wellness due to the impacts, the knock-on impacts of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's very likely, right? I think people had more time in their hands. And at the same time, you know, a lot of people were impacted by the pandemic, you know, whether that's them losing jobs, right? So usually great things come out of an adversity, right? That's usually the trend. And at the back of pandemic, people became more self-aware around these things, around mental health, around looking after themselves, right? And I think these trends have really, really picked up, particularly after the pandemic.
Absolutely, because what it's actually pointing towards is that if people were interested then, it's not so much that it's going to decline as a market, but it's only going to reinvigorate an existing interest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people have become really cautious in terms of what they're consuming. Personally, I find myself reading ingredients that I never did. Right?
Sure, something perhaps we may not have done about 5-10 years ago, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're seeing that change take place.
That's right.
And it's a change which is for the good.
Yeah, it is a change after all, for the good. So let's talk about another very interesting dimension of this entire conversation of generational wealth transfer. So once again, USD 84 trillion by 2045. Now, how exactly are legacy financial institutions adapting to, of course, the challenges and the newer demands of millennial and Gen Z investors?
They really have to innovate, right? So we've seen Bank of Montreal roll out Smartfolio. You know, we've seen Goldman Sachs looking at this digital proprietary platform that they're rolling out, right? We've seen banks like Julius Baer backing banks like Seba, which specializes in digital assets.
That's right.
So we really do see legacy institutions getting into this space because this is really the next frontier, right? The second piece, as I said, it's about vitality and vibrancy. So can you make these concepts engaging for an audience that is the touch screen generation, right?
Very true.
Gamifying.
Converting the formats.
Yeah, converting the format. And I think if you just look at these trading apps, they're extremely colorful, they're very engaging, right? And the entire process has become so much more fun than you trading stocks back in the day, right?
Very true.
So I think gamification is going to play a big role when it comes to helping legacy institutions reaching out to a younger audience, right?
It also sounds like an interesting opportunity, and correct me if you've already actually seen it happening in person, but further personalization of wealth investment and also building of direct relationships rather than financial and wealth management institutions being a little more distant and removed.
Absolutely, and I think coming back to that point, Hamina, we're seeing these large institutions creating next-gen programs, you know, where they bring the heirs of family wealth
That's right.
into a room, and they discuss in terms of how do you create longevity around your wealth preservation. So I think education has also become quite critical, particularly within the private banking sector, and ensuring there's engagement with the younger generation.
Actually ensuring that they are not going to migrate away from the traditional wealth management institutions, right?
Yeah, and they're not going to migrate away, also helping them realize the importance of convention.
Right.
Right.
And perhaps hybrid models actually moving forward.
Exactly, right? So you can not completely radically move away from how investments have been done for so many years and where they're allocated. So just getting the right balance of it is where there's a lot of education required, right? So you never go 80% into your digital asset portfolio, right? You need to be conservative, keep it around 5 to 10% of your overall net assets. So I think these things are quite critical, and I think a lot of these large institutions are building these next-gen programs which are engaging a younger audience.
Exactly, because it's all about giving them sufficient options when it comes to investment choices as well.
Yeah.
Right. So to move around and close out the discussion, actually, I'd actually like to talk about perhaps some models of collaboration which are actually emerging, because as we previously touched on briefly, the Gen Z and the millennials are the ones who are actually in charge of most family offices these days, and they are being run to a completely different sort of a model from just about 2-3 decades ago.
Yeah, I think we've seen the rise of multi-family offices, right, where you can pool resources, right, and move in a certain direction. Right, so so that's happening. The other piece is, as I said, family offices are now really the centers of innovation, right? They want to engage with the heir of this wealth and what are his interests. The other piece is we're also seeing technology and philanthropy converge within the family office space. So I think a good example is the family office of Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan. They're actually producing software for philanthropy, right, for their partners. So we're seeing a lot of development, and I think even family offices, while you have these large institutions, the Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, they're moving towards digitization. We're also seeing family offices using technology to ensure people that they're catering to, they really understand where their portfolio is.
Exactly. So that actually is pointing nearby to an increased demand for transparency and also real-time data access. So does this bring about more opportunities for the wealth management sector?
Yeah.
Or is it more about the existing players are already capitalizing on it?
See, this is what we call as productization, right? So what productization does is it gives you scalability. Right? So I think now these services can be scaled to a much bigger extent than they could be in the past.
Sure.
Right? Because now you've built these interfaces which gives you access to the information that you're looking for. And multifamily offices are doing that, and they have to do it because they're not just dealing with one family, they're dealing with multiple families.
Exactly. So dealing with multiple families then also brings about one last really wider question. Let's look at and shift back the focus a little to something that we mentioned earlier as a huge market of growth. What about balancing risk and opportunity when it comes to the wide arena of, cryptocurrency, especially digital assets, and how that is not yet a fully legislated arena, but at the same time, you do see so much of interest around it.
Yeah, I think regulatory concerns still remain across the world around digital assets, right? It's improving. Particularly countries like Dubai and Singapore are really on the forefront of it. The other piece is cybersecurity is a major threat, how your assets are held, right? The other piece is the encryption. Are you able to ensure that your keys are kept safe for these digital assets that you're holding? There's also a big gap around estate planning for your digital assets. And I think that's an area where there needs to be a lot of innovation that needs to take place, right? So my advice to families or heirs of wealth is to really work closely with lawyers who understand the digital asset landscape, particularly around the estate planning piece.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think it's a very interesting intersection because right now, whenever you mention digital assets, digital planning, it also brings about the inevitable role of AI. So AI and ethics and how that actually applies to individuals who are heavily investing in this arena and whether or not they are able to ensure that they get back the returns, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think AI has had far-reaching benefits, particularly because it can now generate actionable insights on what you need to do, particularly when it comes to your investments, right? But there's still you need the fine balance of taking actionable insights from an AI protocol and somebody who's seen multiple macro cycles and is very experienced in terms of how investments are managed, right? So I think a good balance of that, particularly for large ticket size investments, is quite critical.
Exactly. So in conclusion, Nirbhay, what would you say the year ahead, not 2024 since we're towards the cresting end of it, but how is 2025 looking like when it comes to wealth management, particularly for millennial and Gen Z investors?
I think a couple of points, Tahmina. So I think first there is a huge demand for alternative residencies because people have become transnational. There's no point speaking about investments if you cannot ensure there's longevity to those investments, right?
True.
And the first step is to be part of countries where you can preserve your wealth, right? And that's quite critical for people in emerging and developing parts of the world or where there's a conflict. The second piece is obviously digitization, vibrancy and vitality is critical for engaging a younger audience, ensuring they're using these protocols that the banks are developing. So I think that would be the second piece. The third is we are indeed moving towards a world where investments really need to be aligned with your personal values. So ensuring that we're following that, right, is something to watch out for. And the final piece is the entire concept of sovereignty is going to be challenged because now you have corporations with bigger market cap than GDPs of different countries.
That's right, exactly.
Saudi Aramco would probably have a market cap of more than Brazil, right? So are we prepared for an era where sovereignty looks very different, right? I believe there's going to be rise of network states, there's going to be rise of e-governance, right? And it's very likely that you and I were growing up in an era where an NFT was sold for $670 million. So it's very likely that there will be alternative residencies in the metaverse that people would be exploring, right? There could be blockchain in general is a place. That's what people call it.
Correct. A place indeed.
It is a place indeed. So I think these would be the key trends to really watch out for. My personal favorite out of these would be the network states and how they develop.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Nirbhay, thank you for such an interesting conversation that I think anchors around the fact that as the world gets increasingly borderless, investments, however, appear to be increasingly grounded in grassroots interests. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tahmina. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, that's all we have time for today on Niaga Spotlight, featuring a very insightful discussion around the generational transfer of wealth. I'm Tahmina Kausji signing off for now. Here's to a productive week ahead.